Hello and welcome back to the Questioning Behaviour podcast. My name is Sarah and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm here with my lovely friend Merle van den Akker as well, the second host of this same podcast that we're on. Say hi.
You're
Hi.
the dummy that don't believe in science.
And today we are speaking to a very special guest, someone who goes by the name of David Fanner, unless he is going to tell me otherwise. But let's let David tell us who he is, where he comes from, and how he got to where he is.
Great. Well, very happy to be here. Well, where to start? I was born in Africa, in Zimbabwe, but in terms of where I am now, currently working at Ogilvy Consulting, behavioral science practice. And really this has just come from a long time love of behavior and sort of the mix of design, psychology, linguistics, science, rigor, like all these things. It's kind of, that's kind of where my interest stemmed. I've always been interested in sort of creative things like design, but it kind of angered me that they just weren't talking in design in like scientific terms. It was like the most you get really with design is like maybe color theory or composition theory, but it's all very intuitive and it feels right. But, I'd love to know, well, what is the effect of blue on behavior, or like what is red on behavior, or, how do we scientifically study this? And so I was really looking for like design psychology, but nothing like that existed until 2015, saw a TED talk by Rory Sutherland and blew my mind. Suddenly learnt this word, behavioral economics, which was kind of like a bit of design, a bit of psychology, a bit of linguistics, a bit of economics, mishmash of so many disciplines. And I just made it my mission since then to just, dive in, learn as much as I can. And now I'm here at Ogilvy doing it every day and loving every minute of it.
Excellent. So then my question becomes, were you somewhat involved with Nudgestock? I mean, we recently, and I put this in quotation marks, had this amazing event. Were you involved?
Yes, I mean, I've gone to the last 4 beforehand, and then this one was employed there. I was for the first time on the other side. And there's so much behind the scenes organization going on there. But my very small part for this was, first of all, the upfront sort of creative platform. The word BS, it was to and fro. Do we call this big festival BS? We think it every year, but I don't think we can do it. We thought, what? Screw it. This year, let's do BS. And that was I was part of that contribution. But on the day, my role was really like social media engagement. I made these 1-minute segments with Fiona, who's head of social. And basically my role was to scrape Twitter, find the most interesting comments people are making and put them on the big screen and like brief Fiona and just, give a quick social update. That was my role. But there were plenty of other people doing other cool stuff.
We've noticed with Nudgestock, I think with Ogilvy in general, there's a lot going on in the background where exactly that it's there, but it's kept very, very hush-hush. Talking about hush-hush, how is that Nano Salad developing? I mean, I have some questions about that. Maybe you have some answers for me.
What the hell's a Nano Salad? I feel like I missed the conversation.
No,
here.
David can explain this to you. The Nano Salad cost quite the outrage. Or Microsoft, I think I forgot the name. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so this year for Nudgestock, we decided to do the big BS ideation. And basically what we did is we set a brief at the start of the day, which the team, including the power of Ogilvy behind them, were going to first of all, diagnose the problem for this product called Nano Salad, which is basically dehydrated salad. It's like this much salad, like, I don't know, a football amount, down to like a sachet, because you take away the liquid and what's left is just the nutrients. Cool product, lots of innovation, but very, very weird and weird behaviors around it. And so this was the brief. We thought it'd be a fun one to do with everyone. So we said at the beginning of the day and we did a big combi analysis at the beginning, working out what's the problem behind the problem, diagnosing it through to creative ideation. And we also involved the audience with this one. And I think we had over 1,200 ideas submitted from the audience. And so big process. And eventually, by the end of the day, we brought in Cody Porter-Bell, who's like the design branch of Ogilvy. And we brought in like product developers, all sorts, to like get a mock behavioral intervention. And I think we've actually got some. You can now see them, I think, on the website of where we got to. But I also ran a workshop last week with D&AD, who's an organization who's like design and art direction. And we did it with the shifters who are there. They're doing a course there. And again, completely just amazing ideas. But it's such a weird product that it just needs some help behaviorally to make it something that you actually want to do, because it is a bit weird.
All right.
Interesting. Okay, I'm definitely going to have to check that out later. I feel like I was completely out of the loop there. But yeah, really, really cool exercise. I mean, I'm curious. I've, see some of the output from Ogilvy, including Nudgestock and sort of Twitter presence. And we've spoken to Rory and some other people who are involved with the work that you do. What is a normal day like working at Ogilvy? What's your classic Monday? What do you actually get up to inside the team?
It's such a cliche, but there is no classic Monday. And this is the best part. Any business where you've got clients, which means that you have to know things very, very quickly about certain things. Like you get a client, it's like food waste. So you now got to learn a lot about food waste. The next minute it's a bank in South Africa. So, okay, right, today we're learning about finance. And then from there, okay, it's now a sustainability brief in the Middle East or whatever it might be. So how it would start, if we put it in practical terms, is if it's Monday, I tend to work from home. But now because we've got this hybrid thing, on Tuesday, Wednesday, come in, go get my coffee from Ogilvy's famed coffee machine. It's very good. Very happy with it. And
very nice.
Yeah, it's just sort of, you can be at any part of the project. You tend to have a few clients going at once. You might have, I don't know, one client where you have the ideation stage, coming up with hundreds of ideas using kind of design thinking. You might be on another client where you're sort of right at the end looking more at how do we evaluate this. Or you might be right at the very beginning where you're sort of diagnosing the problem. And so you might spend your morning doing like a COM-B analysis or something. And you might spend your afternoon coming up with hundreds of ideas. Or sometimes what we like to call is creative leave, where we just say okay, put your hours of office on, go away from your screen, solve the problem. And so we did an activity, Mike and I, on the team a few weeks ago, where we said, all right, you've got 1 hour to crack this problem. So we went away. He played piano for 20 minutes. I played Minecraft for 15, just because it's something to get you into flow state, thinking differently. And by the end of it, and I played around my freezer for a bit because it was a food waste brief. Went for a walk to Tesco, had a look around the shelves, came back. Both of us had a really cool idea that we're really, really happy with, presented it back to each other. So it's really varied, but it goes between sort of client management stuff to problem solving stuff to creative stuff and strategy. So it's a real blend. What's nice is you get to do all of it. It's not just you're a strategist or a creative or an account person.
Sure. Now, I have a bit of a trick question. I'll admit, it's not a fair question to you. We've had plenty of consultants on, and by this stage, I don't think I've asked any of them this question. Don't think of it as a personal attack. But with this type of very varied consulting, I mean, you do apply behavioral science, but you apply it to a varied problem set. So behavioral science as a tool, but not as the specialty, if you will. After a while, do you feel like you actually do become specialized in a specific field, or do you always remain more of a generalist and a jack of all trades, but never really a specialist? I've just always been curious about this type of consulting, how it really works with regards to what you get to learn in depth and what you actually don't.
Really interesting. I think that's kind of yet to be fully explored, but I think we're definitely finding that some people really, really love sustainability, for example, and they have deep expertise in sustainability. So when a sustainability brief comes along, boom, we talk to them.
Sure.
But often we are still quite generalist. But I mean, the magic of Ogilvy is because we've also got teams all over the world, is we can talk to someone like Benoit in France, who's an expert on health and food behavior change stuff. So we can tap into someone who really, really knows what they're talking about with this. But we are finding even within the team that there's people sort of settle into their niches a little bit. Some people are very much the evaluation stage of things. Some people, just love the sort of creative exploding things. But yeah, I think it's really a blend is the answer. But I do feel this as well, because I think there's a place for both people, actually, the specialists and then the generalists. I would 100% put myself in the generalist camp. I always want to know stuff. But I think also you don't necessarily have choice. If we've got a brief that comes along and everyone else is busy, it's going to be this person who works on it. So there's some practical things in the end. But in the end, we do involve the whole team on most briefs, especially with ideations. It's very successful often having just an hour chat with someone like Rory, who really, really knows what they're talking about, or someone who's big into sustainability maybe. Just have half an hour chat with them. It is always so disproportionately helpful having an expert. Or now we sometimes collaborate with academics. And that's another really helpful one. It's just so disproportionately helpful speaking to someone who like really, really knows a field in particular, because they've covered the basics and you're not just scraping the surface.
Right.
Fair enough.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, right at the beginning, when you're sort of talking about you wanted to know about behavioral science before you knew what the name was, you go beyond design and ask questions about how do we scientifically test this and know this and understand this. How much science do you find you actually do now you're working for Ogilvy?
As a team, we're doing plenty. Everything is always rigorously backed up, which is actually the beauty, to be honest, is because it's like we can't just get away with just saying, let's do that, And worst case, if we do decide let's do that, it's like, okay, let's properly test it. So it's always going back to science. Like you have a literature review at the start of most projects, and so this is where it's just really helpful to dig into what we already know. So it's always scientific, and I think that's where the strength is, because it also means that you can justify some of these really bombastic things to your clients, like making it more expensive or taking away options or adding like 3 more options, because you can say, actually, Acres 2011 did a sample with just the same brief and they got these results. So I think that's where the science can really help, because it's like they're asking us to forge a path for them as consultants or whatever, problem solvers. And it really helps having this wealth of background data to say, do you know what, they applied over here just fine. Probably just out of risk avoidance, we might actually be fine doing the same.
Yeah, that seems perfectly valid. I want to go back to what we were just talking about. You would describe yourself as a generalist. Do you not have a niche that you're kind of moving towards currently, or something that you're slightly more interested in than any other topic within behavioral science?
I think my current two, I'm always learning things, always got a project on the go, but my current 2 faves that I'm trying to develop in tandem is systems thinking and social network analysis. And these are... I'm
going to need help with both.
So systems thinking really is just the school of thought which is kind of tied to complexity theory, tied to the idea that we should be, to properly make change, we can't just be making component changes, like to parts of the journey, for example. We have to be seeing things from the system point of view, because things are really, really complicated. And sometimes you can go along, we can like make it linear, like actually climate action, it's just this. We put a mark between A and B, and we say, okay, let's problem solve for that. You're not really solving the problem. Like you need to understand the whole system and identify like leverage points is what they call it, of like, where do we intervene? Where's the best point? And so I think a nice example of this, which kind of also comes back to first principles thinking, is one, I think, from DEFRA, where the brief was to decrease plastic waste in London for consumers and citizens. And so the obvious thing to do really would be like, okay, let's get people to stop using plastic water bottles and let's get them to like buy their own water bottles or something, that reusable one.
Sure.
And this is, you do a campaign on that. So like, okay, let's increase the salience of them. Like there's normalized bottles like this, like only cool people do this. Let's get, I don't know, Gordon Ramsay to use one. I don't know. David Attenborough.
I personally am not a massive fan of Gordon Ramsay, but I can see where we're going with this messenger vibe.
We're not going to use Gordon Ramsay. We're going to use Cass Sunstein to influence you here. That's the approach we might take. Okay, how do we make them nicer to use? But actually, what is the upstream problem? And actually, the upstream problem is Londoners need to be hydrated. So as soon as you understand that, like, systems point of view, the first principle is to hydrate Londoners. Now you can you've sort of opened up the problem space. So it's like, okay, I think what they did in the end was water fountains. And the problem with water fountains is you don't want to use them. The height that people can tamper with them, they're not very sanitary. So now the brief might be like, how can we make the most behaviorally optimized water fountain that you feel comfortable using, that doesn't feel dirty? And that's where we then go wide with the behavioral science and work out the barriers people have. Like, is it sanitation? Is it dripping on, getting wet hands? Whatever it might be. That's the thing. So I think it really starts from that point for systems thinking, like mapping the system to work out properly where should we be intervening. And often it's multiple points. And this is thankfully where, as behavioral scientists, we're lucky. Whereas if you say you work in advertising or social media, your job is to do social media or do advertising, or policy is what you do. But as behavioral scientists, we get to span across all of this. We get to say, actually, some policy would be great here, or actually, we need some mass salience advertising campaign here. So like, it's worth you spending a few million on TV or something. So I think this is where we're actually lucky, as we can span the entire system to change and find place to influence.
Okay, yeah. Makes intuitively a lot of sense. So can 100% get behind that interest. Now the second one.
Again, in social network analysis, this one actually came from Nicholas Christakis, who was at Nudgestock in 2017. This is another one which
A throwback.
Yes, yeah. This I think was my first one, or maybe it's 2018. But it's on YouTube if you'd like to see the talk. But he's basically the world's expert on networks, and he studied disease and epidemiology, all sorts of things. But essentially, this is like looking at networks and social networks. And we know that the world basically arranges itself in networks. You've got, your neurons, you've got biological networks, how bees work together. It's kind of like the underlying system of much of nature is through networks. And it's a great way to plot data. And so I just sort of sense that I need to learn more about this, because often we talk about norms, but it's like, it's a bit like spray and pray, how we talk about them now. We just sort of like, okay, let's just normalize it. Let's like make it seem normal. But like,
right. Are
we understanding who should we be normalizing this to? Say we're intervening in the playground. Are we starting with the fringe people? Are we starting with the cool kids? Your intervention might be so much more efficient. Instead of like spending a lot of money on the entire playground trying to like get a norm going, actually just talk to like the 5 central people who everyone looks to influence. And we can suddenly, like I said, it's like making Tamagotchis or phones popular on the playground. Get the 5 cool kids with a Tamagotchi. By next week, everyone else will have them. So I sort of feel like I'm interested from a point of how do we get behavior to spread through the network, because it's just more efficient. But it's also just very powerful. Like, we are influencing the network, but the network's also influencing us. And the one I'd like to bring up here is happiness. If you get a 5K pay rise, which is more like an 8K pay rise now in today's money, your happiness goes up about 2%. But
that's not much, is it?
It's not. It really isn't. But if you have a happy friend, your happiness goes up 15%. If you have a friend who is happy, your happiness goes up 10%.
What exactly is the definition of friend here?
So let's say a connection, someone you spend time with. So
I spend a lot of time with people that I do not wish to spend time with. This is not a good definition.
They're influencing.
Say it's me.
No, it's not you.
Okay, so
do I see you as a friend, Sarah? Yes, I see you as a friend. I think, if you were to be happy, I would be happier as a result of that.
Yeah. For science, I will definitely take a pay rise just to test this.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, yeah, no, I will take that too.
We'll do that first. I'll be the control sample. So,
Can you imagine an 8K pay rise on a PhD salary? Mate, I'm not gonna be happy. I'm gonna be ecstatic.
It's like 100% increase.
And it's not 100% increase, we would like to add, but it's uncomfortably close to 50.
Yeah. No, I empathize greatly.
Thanks.
So let's take away friends, connections. If you're 1 degree separated, scientific terms here, 1 degree separated from someone, you get a 15%. 2 degrees, so say we see each other regularly. This is my housemate. If he's happy, you get a 10% increase in happiness. But if you're 3 degrees separated, so my housemate's mum, so that is his mum influencing him, influencing me, influencing you, at 3 degrees, you get a 6% increase in happiness.
That's only assuming I like you. Maybe I want you to be utterly miserable.
We don't even need to like each other. It's just you're always being influenced by the people around you. So this is where I sort of understand that we need to be understanding like how behavior is like rippling through the network, which we actually intuitively understand now with COVID. We now have quite clear mental models of spread and disease, and like your R rate, for example, how it can go up and down. So really, this is the 2 things: system thinking, understanding, where do we intervene, where's the best points, and like to intervene, and social network analysis is really like just understanding fundamentally, like, again, where is the best place? How can we do really efficient change interventions?
All right.
So social welfare analysis, it almost sounds like one way in which you could do sort of a welfare analysis of, beyond just measuring the one predetermined outcome to the one person that's, directly being involved in the intervention, looking at it from a network perspective. Is that something that you would use it for?
Oh, definitely. And actually, there's a great Ogilvy case study on this. And this was, I think, from 2018, where the brief was mental health, getting men to talk about mental health. And historically, most interventions focus on the man. So the person who is suffering from bad mental health, saying, talk to your friends about this, it's fine. But actually, that's really difficult from a capability point. So instead, like from a network point, okay, let's focus on the people around this person. But again, it's really difficult. There's a motivation thing there. Like they're highly motivated to look after their mate. They have the opportunity to look after their mate. They go to the pub together. They play football together, whatever it might be. But there's low capability. So this is where the campaign came up. When they realized it was capability barrier, was like, ask twice is what the campaign was about. So it's like, are you okay? Yeah, I'm all right. Are you okay, really? No, actually, no, things are a bit stressful at the time. So I think that's one where, retrospectively, looking back, a network approach would have got us there. But for sure, like, the same with, it works with smoking behaviors, with obesity behaviors. You have a massive % increased chance of smoking or becoming obese if you hang around with people who have those characteristics as well, just because they partly gravitate to people like that if you have it, but also it rubs off on you. Are we going to go to McDonald's next, or are we going to go make a salad, or we're going to go to Pret and have a salad? Depending which friend group around, your calories are either 1,200 calories or 600 calories. And that's just based on who you're hanging around with. So it really pays to understand how the people around you are influencing you, not how you're influencing them.
No, that's a very fair point. I just remember with regards to, so the reason I just chuckled with is I remember an article from, I think, maybe about 2 years ago, if that, and that was a bit controversial because it did apply social network analysis, albeit a very misunderstood form of it, to just, stating that, do you want to lose weight? Cut all your fat friends out of your life. It was a very controversial article. It was,
Lord.
You can see what it's trying to go for. It just didn't go for it particularly well. If that is the kind of application of social network analysis, aren't we in for a social cull? Like, who can I still be friends with after this?
This is the thing, it's where do you put the line here? Where that you understand that some friends are bad for you. So I think this is where it's like your personal decision. For example, if you're incredibly career focused and you have people who aren't, it would really pay for you to hang around with people who are where you want to be. And the same with your social media, I think, is another one. So I think there are ways you can do this where you don't have to cut off your family or cut off your friends.
Oh, I'm so relieved.
Like for what I do, for example, I really curate my Twitter. My Twitter is professional only, so I follow behavioral science. And again, with my social media, I just don't follow or I don't engage with people who bring me down. I just who I feel bad things with. So I'm sort of doing it there in some sense. I'm finding only the voices I want to hear, and if I want to hear more voices, I just sort of train the algorithm a little bit. With even TikTok's another one. If I want to see more of that content, I'd triple tap it and I'll add it to favorites just so it knows more of this. And I tell it if I don't want to see this, then I'll stop seeing it. So I think you can sort of curate this a little bit, or just being more aware of say you're hanging around with a friend who has some characteristics that actually you don't like. I think just to be aware of that. But on the surface level, it can sound very sociopathic, just cutting out people because they don't serve your ends.
I don't think sociopathic is the word I would want to use for it. I mean, obviously, if you have toxic people in your life and they always make you feel bad about yourself, and if you can, cut them out, take care of yourself. Now, the vibe I'm getting a bit more of this, I think that the workaholic or career-focused is a much nicer term for it. So if you are a very career-focused person, surrounding yourself with other people who are also very career-focused, maybe if you're even in the same field, can actually be very, very helpful. But I think there are ways of going way too far in that, where if your entire friend group or your entire social network is the same as you are missing out on different viewpoints. And then if you replace career-focused by involuntary celibate, which is an incredibly right-wing, very disturbed movement with a very clear opinion and social view. If you are slightly an incel and that, or just slightly disgruntled with society as it currently is, specifically with regards to dating, and then you focus entirely on people with similar viewpoints and people who are not controversial to you and people who do not make you feel bad about these viewpoints, then as a result, you're going to seek out and you're going to become more extremist because there's always someone more extreme than you. And suddenly you're in this massive echo chamber where every feeling you've ever had is being resonated back to you because that's what you're seeking out. How do you keep social network analysis healthy knowing that extremism is quite a natural product, that can come from its application if you do it a bit too much, way too much.
100%. This is exactly where we should be thinking. Like, say we're going to do an intervention, and especially I think for, like, say public health or something really big with a lot of funding, which is going to be millions of people. This is where we really need to consider, like, what are the unintended consequences, and also what is the lived experience of this? Because another one recently where a friend said they used Goodreads, which is like a book tracking thing by Amazon, but they said, I feel so much pressure to read. So yeah, and they feel uncomfortable but this is the lived experience of our intervention. For us, we can pat ourselves on the back and say, we've increased book readership by 16%, or they read 58 books last year. But they said, imagine the lived experience of that, of you being influenced by a streak or these, design things, is not necessarily great. So I think 100%, this is where we should be thinking of, like, it can go too far. And this is, again, when we get filter bubbles. And I think something that we need to be working on actively is getting outside of our bubble, which I think is not only just good form as humans, but also just for creativity. And this is where I think behavioral science can trip over itself a little bit if we only talk to behavioral science, which is where I think Ogilvy is very lucky to sit in a creative network, a global network, is because you can just dip into all these other disciplines so much easier. Because I think the worst thing we could do for creativity is have only behavioral science talking to only behavioral science.
Yeah.
So 100%, I echo that.
Then I've got another nice and rough question for you, because I'm clearly on a roll. Given the formalization of behavioral science education, do you think this will be to the advantage of the average behavioral scientist and people coming on into the field, given that behavioral science is now essentially its own discipline? Or do you think that might actually come with some massive drawbacks?
For sure, drawback. I worry about homogeny. It could be being homogenous, actually, because if we all have the same 5 lecturers, especially if there's like 5 universities.
Oh, I can name them. I can name them for you if you like.
Yeah. So like, it's probably, we might have the 80-20 split here where, 80% of successful behavioral science grads come from 20% of the institutions. And it means we've potentially got the same syllabus for us for at least a few years. And I think, so yeah, you're going to have more behavioral scientists, which is great. And they're going to have a base understanding, which is brilliant. But they're all going to know Combi, all going to know Mindspace and like the same models, and they're going to approach things from the same areas, which is where I think we need to then have these sort of firecracker people, fringe people, a bit like Rory, actually. Rory Southern's a great one, who are like a bit buzzy, sort of very intersectional, and they bring a bit of tang to the field, and they bring a bit of like outside stuff. Like I was reading about this 18th century philosopher or something, which is where I would like to play personally, of like this intersections, because it's just more interesting. Like, what can we learn with architecture and behavioral science, or like design, or again, there's network stuff. It's just, it's more sociology than anything else. But I think behavioral science needs friends. And I think as a discipline, it actually does, it has capability to have this, because it's so broad, and behavioral science is technically a bunch of different fields beneath it. I actually don't worry about us being too this way, because we can always just lop in sociology to the mix, or lop in anthropology, and it wouldn't be too upsetting to anyone if we started looking at anthropology in behavioral science. Fair. But I think this is a good concern to have, and I wonder from an employment point, as students and anyone coming into it, like, how are you going to differentiate yourself against 700 UK-based behavioral science masters? Hopefully you get a selection thing where, well, the ones who differentiate themselves keep it fresh.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, like, how much of a problem it actually is to have, behavioral science degrees. I agreed with most of what you said in the second half of your answer. The fact that behavioral science is really quite accessible as a discipline for anyone who has, you can study philosophy and have something to say about behavioral science, or sociology, or design, or marketing. So is it really so much of a big issue that we're having, behavioral science degrees pop up? Like, are there really so few and are they all really teaching the same syllabus?
To be honest, I couldn't speak to the schools and if they are teaching the same syllabus.
They aren't. It was a trick question. Well, it wasn't a trick question. It was an unfair question. I'm just genuinely curious to get people's views on that.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I don't think we've reached market saturation anywhere near for behavioral science. We're still so new in terms of really bringing it to the masses that there's so much to go. But also the point to this is that behavioral science grads actually aren't all going into strictly behavioral science.
True.
What we want from a network point is we sort of have these evangelists of behavioral science who go work in, I don't know, accountancy, or they go work for the military, they go work for wherever they go work for, Google. And suddenly we've got these evangelists of the behavioral science approach. So I think it actually strengthens us as a field. It just, I think it's just good to be aware of more from your own point as you're selling yourself, like, how am I different to everyone else?
Right. Yeah, because maybe as a signal, a behavioral science degree isn't going to be as informative the more people get one, a signal of quality. Yeah.
Actually, Rory talks about this. He talks about the inflation of degrees. Like, you used to not really need a degree, and it was a very specialist thing. And now you sort of almost need a degree for most jobs because it's so open, like 65% of people go to university. And then it's like, okay, how do you stand out about that? And then, okay, you need a master's as well sometimes for certain jobs. And then my PhD as well. So it does slightly inflate things. But
wow. Yeah.
Slightly. Going from a master's degree to, hey, you need a PhD degree to compete in industry, that's not what I would call slight inflation.
I don't think that's true.
You're living the PhD
like, I don't think people are saying that. I don't think people are going to PhDs to go into industry, at least for now. I mean, it's called qualification inflation, I think, is the fancy term, because it rhymes. It's very memorable.
Rhyme is reason.
Exactly. But I'm interested with going back to social network analysis, because I think when we were talking, for example, about the example of, you're career-minded and you are surrounding yourself with career-minded people, how much of it is just about, how we choose our friends? Like, we like hanging out with people who are similar to us. How much control do we actually have over who is in our network? Is that something that you've given much thought to? I mean, I know you said you tried yourself a little bit, especially with social media and your sort of online presence to sort of curate your social network through the algorithm, but how much control do people actually have over this?
I could not put a number to it, but we recognize, you're right, homophily is what they call it. We stick to people who are like us, basically. And as much as you can intervene, you're still you, actually. And you're still naturally going to come into things. Like, I'm pretty sure if you were to look at, I don't know, Tinder maybe as an example, where people select people who are like them within, I was just reading a book on this today talking about dating. Most people choose people like them, and it just happens naturally. And there's no way that you could deliberately seek out certain partners and really be fulfilled and keep that act up for years and years and years sustainably. So I think, again, when you were talking earlier about this, cut out your fat friends, like, the problem is not even just the fact of your friends, it's that there's actually an error in the data a little bit there, in that people stick to people like them. So it's not just because them, it's just people who have similar characteristics are just going to gravitate to each other.
Oh no, it was a terrible article. I'm not defending it in the slightest. No, I'm just saying this is where social network analysis can be taken if it's taken quite out of context.
This is exactly where what you're talking about here, Sarah, is that some behaviors we just gravitate. So of course you get pockets of people, but you're right that the point that we can intervene isn't major, really. But I think you can still be a bit mindful about this. I think it's easier in digital realms, or maybe like one-sided ways, for example, where you're looking at the stimulus that's coming into your brain. So, for example, what film you watch. I think you can definitely train yourself to some degree. Say you really want to get into, like, I don't know, French cinema or something. You can edge yourself up to that. You can start with something basic. Or say you want to get into metal. You're not going to go straight to death metal. You might start with something a bit more palatable like this, and then you're going to edge yourself there until your taste is acquired to that. So I think you can acquire taste to certain things.
David is just slowly edging his way, via soft metal or pop metal, exactly, all the way to death metal. So have you reached Slipknot yet, or is that not yet for you?
Metal's not really my thing, but I suppose for me, like, electronic music was one where I sort of started, a few years ago with, I don't know, drum and bass and stuff. And then or like melodic house and stuff. And then now I'm like fully happy listening to techno, like bunker stuff. Which
oh wow, you've gatewayed all the way to techno. That's a lot, David. You've gone too far.
But this is the thing, like you can choose yourself. You can definitely curate the stimulus coming in. But sure. I think where it's a bit harder is where it's like things that you can't really control, like your family, for example, or your workplace. You can't avoid some people, and you just have to live with that. And you also can't seek out everyone. Like some people are just going to be inaccessible. So I think you can, to quite a big extent, but probably more with one directional things. It's much harder when it's like you bump into people. Because again, this is where the magic is, where you have these intersections. And as soon as you start putting only people who agree with you in the same room, you're just going to get these reinforcing feedback loops, which just get, I don't know, arms race behavior or rich get richer behavior, where it just gets exponentially worse.
No, that's super, super interesting way of thinking about it, particularly thinking about the problem that you're interested in from the sort of the social network perspective or the systems point of view. So thinking about looking forward into the future, do you think that that's going to be a really popular way of applying behavioral science? What do you see within the next 5 years? Anything that you're excited about for the field?
I think where I get excited about with the field, and I think it's going, is this intersections part, where behavioral science has more friends and is playing with more people. Like you now see it in most major banks, there's behavioral science. You now see it in sustainability initiatives. You see it in marketing. You see it in, I don't know, design, like innovation, product development, like Spotify and Uber had behavioral science teams at some point. So I think that really is a lot of the future of behavioral science, is that it's actually just become best practice for a lot of things. And I still think there's going to be a role for specialists who really know their stuff. And there's always going to be experts, as you would have in any current industry. But I think it really is just it's going to become good practice in the end. Like how do we, for UX, all websites are going to have some social norms component, or at least an awareness of this. Marketing is going to understand the power of these things a little bit better. So I think that's where it really is going, that it's just to become embedded. And I think you will start to see more, like, for example, CBO, that's kind of a new thing now, but 10 years, 15 years time, actually more organizations, especially big ones, are going to have a CBO, I think. So I think it's just going to become deeper part of everything, because as we mentioned earlier, it just captures and brings in so many disciplines, and it just sits across so many that I think, that's my conclusion. It's going to become so embedded in so much more, just because it's fundamental to everything. If your business is people, and these people understand people, these behavioral scientists, then, well, why wouldn't you? Every single business has a human component, because it's the people who are paying you money. And given we're in a capitalist system, you're rewarded for being paid money. So I think it just, from a systems point, is almost inevitable. If you've got people who are making more people money with the shiny new thing, well, then that's the way it's going to go.
Well, I'm very excited to know that CBO positions will become more frequent. I will be adjusting my career path to fit that development. I'd love to be a CBO. I'd love to see it. Then I guess the last question is, David, if people have enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure that they have, so I wouldn't worry too much about that, but where can they find you online? How can they stay in touch with you? How can they follow you? And is there anything else besides yourself that you would like to plug?
I think Twitter is the one that I'm fairly active on Twitter, so you can find me. Yes, I think this is actually where we met. I've actually followed you for years. I've just known your name for years.
Oh wow!
It's like, we met in 2019, but this is the magic of Twitter. I probably owe part of my career to Twitter, to be honest, because the behavioral science community is really active there.
Yep.
But you can find me on Twitter at utterlydavid.
Perfect.
Because you are utterly David.
This is why I chose it. It's like everything I post is going to be utterly me, so I'm just going to own that, and I can post anything I want. So
fantastic.
Yeah,
fantastic. Well, we'll make sure your Twitter is linked below to reduce as much friction as possible for the listener, so they can get the most Davidisms straight into their Twitter feeds.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that,
David. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you. It's been great.
Well, that was us talking to David Vanner. Again, David, thank you so much for making the time. I thought it was a great conversation. Sarah, what did you think?
I really enjoyed meeting David. I mean, it's always been a little bit of a black box, like what it's like to work inside Ogilvy. You see a lot of the work that they're doing, and they're very active online. There's lots of key players who work for Ogilvy applying behavioral science. But it was kind of just cool to hear about what you actually do. Like, how do you actually apply behavioral science? What type of work is going on there? So that was really interesting, I think, for me and from my perspective. I do have to say, though, I did not realize that David is only 23.
Yeah, we found that out afterwards. Makes us feel old.
That's so upsetting. That's so upsetting.
I know.
100%.
You've chosen the wrong path. The PhD ages you. I mean, literally, because it's a minimum of 3.5 or 3 year trajectory. So, yeah. Well, congrats to David, though. You're young and seemingly very successful. So, I'd argue nothing bad there. But yeah, so 23, utterly David, climbing up the ladder at Ogilvy, messing about with Nano Salad, sounds all good to me.
Yeah, I still haven't looked up Nano Salad, but I kind of I just love the idea of a Nano Salad. It's just so stupid. It's amazing.
No, it seems not to throw any shade, not to throw any hate. Although I have to admit, I think once that was introduced at Nudgestock, because they had like the live chat streaming on the side of it, a lot of people weren't on board with Nano Salad. There are some active. There were a couple of really, really good concerns, obviously, with I think with nutrition value, and if that was actually really the same thing as eating a salad. There were some packaging concerns. There from an environmental perspective, there were still quite a concerns from what I've seen in that live chat. I'm not throwing this out at David, like, David, fix it. It's more like there were some points raised. So I'm very interested in seeing that concept go. But obviously that has very little to do with David. But yeah, just in general, I think we discussed some interesting stuff. I think, like you said, lots of key players at Ogilvy. They sound like, a cool team. They do cool stuff.
Honestly, like, if you re-listen to this episode, don't drink every time we mention Rory Sutherland, because you'll be very drunk.
Oh.
Yes.
No, nothing like that. Anyway, to get back to one of the main things we've discussed, social network analysis. I'm going to look into it deeper. I think it's very, very interesting.
I agree. I think these concepts of... for me, I really like the idea of using social network analysis in a sort of a welfare analysis strategy or stratagem. Oh no. For me, I think what's most interesting about the possibility of using social network analysis is what it could provide to a sort of a welfare analysis of behavior change interventions. And also, I think what David said also about trying to think of indirect paths to behavior change. So influencing behavior through the social network rather than just going directly to the source. And can you increase the effectiveness of interventions and increase the welfare of the most people? I don't know. I think it's really interesting. I think, it's kind of silly to think about individuals as individuals when we're within this big system and big network. So yeah, it makes sense to me. It doesn't sound easy. No, but it makes sense to me.
No, but I think, he mentioned complex systems before, system theory or system reasoning beforehand. And I think these two theories or these two mechanisms go very well together, because I do think they're looking at a similar thing, or they can be very easily integrated. It's just that at the same time, they make things probably more efficient and effective once you figured it out. But the figuring it out of these systems, both on their own and combined, is incredibly difficult. And it's going to require a very thorough analysis of what's going on for one specific behavior, for one specific individual, that individual in the group, that group as its own organism, and that group in the context that they are, and the several decision nodes that they end up going through. And that is, I wish him the best of luck. That's all I can say. Yeah. I wish him the best of luck. Yeah. You should talk to Rafael Batista. I think they'll have a great time together.
Yeah, complex is an understatement, I think. But yeah, hats off to anyone who gives it a go and is successful.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think that's everything we've got time for today. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, David, very much for coming on and, allowing us to talk to you for an hour of your time. We hope you found this episode entertaining, informative, or a little bit interesting, let's put it that way. And hopefully you'll come back and hear some more from us. But until then, we have been your hosts, Sarah and Merle, and we wish you the best of weeks.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying. You're the one I love, you're the one I wanna give to.